The so-called father of hypnosis was inducing panic attacks and calling them healing crises. One of Europe's most respected neurologists taught that only hysterical patients could be hypnotized, and Freud didn't abandon hypnosis because it failed. He abandoned it because he couldn't handle what happened when it worked. The biggest historical names in hypnosis and hypnotherapy were either wrong about what they were doing, wrong about why it worked, or too uncomfortable with the results to even keep going. And the actual breakthrough, the moment that changed everything, came from a debunking commission that set out to prove the whole thing was just nonsense. And ultimately they failed. What they found instead was that the human imagination on its own could produce real, measurable physical change. That's the history that most courses skip. And over the next few minutes, I'm going to share this with you. My name's Shane Fozzard, and this is the real scientific and cultural evolution of hypnosis. Here's the single most important distinction in the entire history of hypnosis, and it's one that almost everyone misses. There are two separate things happening. On one side, you have the phenomenon, which is trance itself, states of deep absorption, focused attention, heightened suggestibility. These have existed for as long as humans have existed. They're observable in Egyptian sleep temples, Greek oracle rituals, Hindu and Indian healing practices, and the ingredients were always there: focused attention, expectation, and incantation. On the other side, you have the discipline, the scientific framework built to study and deliberately utilize those states therapeutically. They didn't actually begin until the 18th century. The confusion in the field, and there's an enormous amount of confusion, stems from conflating these two things, treating them as if they're the same story. They're not. And once you see the difference, everything else falls into place. This is why experts disagree on when hypnosis actually began. Some argue that 5,000 years ago with the phenomenon, and others argue with the 1770s with the discipline. Both positions have merit, and we're going to cover both. So let's start at the beginning. The earliest documented use of trance-like states for healing goes back to the Egyptian sleep temples. They were purpose-built healing spaces where patients would enter states of deep relaxation, guided by priests with the expectation of divine healing. Now, the Greeks also had similar practices at the oracle sites. Hindu and Indian traditions used fixed gaze techniques and rhythmic chanting for healing and spiritual purposes. In the 10th century, a Persian physician called Avicenna made a genuinely important observation. He was the first to document in a medical context that there's a difference between literal sleep and this other state, what we'd now recognize as a hypnotic trance. Now, that's over 1,000 years ago. Then in the 17th century, Athanasius Kircher, a Jesuit scholar, documented something he called brilliant imagination and demonstrated what we now call animal hypnotism through his famous chicken experiment. The key insight here is that the ingredients of trance were always present and always worked, but every culture attributed the results to something external, such as gods or spirits or divine forces. No one was actually looking inward yet. Now, before we move into the modern era, I want to reinforce this crucial distinction. Trance is not hypnosis, and hypnosis is not trance. Trance is a natural human capacity. You experience it every day, absorbed in a book, zoning out on a drive when you're in the car, lost in thought. Shamanic cultures have accessed deeper trance states for thousands of years, and clinical hypnosis is the deliberate utilization of trance within a therapeutic framework. Dr. Milton Erickson captured this perfectly, saying that while hypnosis uses trance, being in trance does not automatically mean you're in hypnosis. That's why self-hypnosis requires a framework, not just relaxation. You need to know how to direct the state, not just enter it. Now let's have a look at the 1770s. Franz Anton Mesmer, the most misunderstood figure in this history. Most people call him the founding father of hypnosis. He wasn't. He never used the word. It didn't exist in his lifetime. Mesmer developed an energy-based healing system called animal magnetism. He believed invisible magnetic fluid flowed between all living beings. His patients experienced dramatic reactions, convulsions, fainting, emotional outbursts, and he believes that it proved that magnetic fluid was being unblocked. So what was actually happening? Well, modern neuroscience gives us a clear answer. Mesmer would position himself just inches from an already anxious patient. He'd stare into their eyes and he'd touch them without warning. Through the lens of threat detection research, Ledoux's work on the amygdala, this behavior was essentially a non-verbal threat. The brain's threat system was activated. Adrenaline and cortisol flooded the body, and the results were severe panic attacks, which 18th century observers, having no framework for this, just called it a healing crisis. His theory was completely wrong. Mesmer's results were undeniably real, but there's a paradox there. It was a wrong mechanism, but real outcomes. And that's what makes Mesmer historically important. Not because he founded hypnosis, but because he accidentally demonstrated the power of suggestion on a massive scale. In 1784, the French government assembled a commission chaired by Benjamin Franklin, including a chemist, Lavoisier, to formally investigate Mesmer's claims. Their conclusion was devastating and brilliant in equal measure. The magnetic fluid just didn't exist. Full stop. But, and this is where the part that most people miss, the cures were real. The patients genuinely improved. The commission attributed these real results entirely to the power of imagination. That finding is arguably the most important single moment in the history of hypnosis. For the first time, a formal scientific body acknowledged that the mind itself, imagination, expectation, belief, could produce measurable physical healing. Now, around the same time, the Bataille Declaration reinforced this. It was a formal statement to the Royal Academy of Sciences declaring animal magnetism contradictory to established scientific truths. That meant that Mesmer was finished. But the door he accidentally opened, the door to the power of imagination, was now wide open and others started to walk through it. Now, there were three figures who fundamentally changed the trajectory of hypnosis. The first one was Étienne Félix d'Hendu Cuvillers, a French baron who published Le Magnétisme Éclair in 1820. Hopefully I'm saying that right. He fiercely opposed the fluid theory, but acknowledged the phenomenon was real. His argument was that the secret lies entirely in controlling the subject's imagination and sensory input. The power belongs to the subject, not the practitioner. And this is a radical inversion on everything that Mesmer had represented. The next one was Abbe Faria, a Goan Portuguese priest who had studied with Indian Brahmins, who introduced simple eye fixation techniques decades before James Braid. He proved that you don't need iron tubs, dramatic rituals, or magnetic passes. You just need a focal point and the subject's own mental processes. And then thirdly, Charles Léonard Lafontaine, a public demonstrator, inadvertently became the catalyst for the scientific revolution. After attending one of his demonstrations, a Scottish surgeon named James Braid was inspired to investigate the phenomenon more seriously. The paradigm shift happened here. The power moved from the practitioner to the subject, from the external to the internal. So then in the 1840s, James Braid, this Scottish surgeon, gave the field its lasting name, hypnosis, from the word hypnos, which is the Greek god of sleep. Now, it's worth noting that historians now believe Cuvillers was actually using the term in French publications as early as 1820, over 2 decades before Braid. But Braid popularized it in the English-speaking world. The problem? He later regretted that name because hypnosis isn't sleep at all. He tried to rename it monoideism, but it was too late. The wrong name stuck, and it's been causing confusion for nearly 200 years. So let me be very clear about what hypnosis actually is. It is not sleep. It is not unconsciousness. It is monoideism, a state of lucid, alert, hyper-focused attention on a single idea. The subject is fully aware. They're not under. They're not out. They are intensely focused inward. Think of it like a cone of attention. Normal waking consciousness is wide and diffused. You're aware of many things simultaneously. In hypnosis, the cone narrows dramatically until your entire awareness is concentrated on one point, and that's why it works. Now, the late 19th century is what historians call the Golden Age, which was actually defined by a fierce rivalry. The Nancy School argued that hypnosis was simply heightened suggestion, a universal human capacity. The Salpêtrière school, led by Charcot in Paris, argued that it was a pathological symptom of hysteria. Only neurologically abnormal people could be hypnotized. Well, it's good to know that Nancy's School of Hypnosis won that debate decisively. But during the same period, something happened that actually set the field back decades. Sigmund Freud, who had trained under Charcot, abandoned hypnosis. The popular myth is that he found it ineffective. The reality is a little bit more nuanced than that. He actually struggled with the idea of transference, that patients would develop irrational emotional attachments, and his own inability to hypnotize every patient caused him doubt. Rather than refine his technique, he pivoted entirely away and invented psychoanalysis. That pivot pulled enormous intellectual energy away from hypnosis research for half a century. It was a detour, not a dead end. The correction came in 1933, when Clark Hull at Yale published the first rigorous laboratory study of hypnosis, permanently moving the field from subjective clinical observation into measurable, repeatable science. Now, there's two mid-century figures that then shaped everything that followed. There was Dr. Milton Erickson, a psychiatrist who developed conversational hypnosis. He recognized that people enter natural trance states constantly, and a skilled practitioner could utilize those everyday states therapeutically, indirect, permissive, and individualized. He's the reason modern hypnotherapy doesn't look like a stage show. Now, Dave Elman took the opposite approach. He stripped away everything, every remaining element of mysticism to pioneer rapid, reliable inductions designed for medical and dental professions. Between the two of them, they defined the two poles of modern clinical hypnosis: indirect conversational and direct rapid. Both valid, both built on the same foundation: monoideism, imagination, and the subject's own capacity for focused attention. And that brings us to right now. In the 21st century, modern brain imaging, fMRI, PET scans, EEGs, has finally allowed us to observe what happens in the brain during hypnosis in real time. And the results are unambiguous. There are measurable, observable changes in neural connectivity during hypnosis. The brain is doing something measurably different. It's not compliance. It's not role play. It's not placebo in the dismissive sense. It's a distinct neurophysiological phenomenon. Researchers still debate the exact mechanism. Some argue it's special altered state. Others argue that it's a goal-directed social behavior shaped by expectation. But both camps agree that this phenomena is real, measurable, and clinically useful. The 5,000-year journey has arrived at its destination. We can now observe, measure, and map the very thing that Egyptian priests, Persian physicians, and Victorian surgeons all recognized was real, but couldn't prove. Today, clinical hypnosis is an evidence-based tool in pain management, anxiety reduction, and targeted behavioral change in hospitals, dental practices, therapeutic clinics, and by individuals for self-directed change. If I had to put the entire history of hypnosis to one equation, it would look like this. You start with raw human trance, the ancient, naturally occurring capacity for absorption and focused attention that humans have always had. You add suggestion, which Mesmer stumbled into accidentally. He thought it was magnetic fluid. It wasn't. But the suggestive element of his method was the active ingredient. You subtract the mystical fluid debunked by the Franklin Commission and Cuvillers, proving the mechanism was internal, not external. You add scientific framing, Braid's monoideism, Hull's laboratory validation, Erickson's clinical methodology, and the result is modern clinical hypnosis. It's not an invention. It's not a discovery. It's a synthesis, a gradual, centuries-long process of learning to deliberately utilize a capacity that was always there. Now, I want to leave you with 3 distinctions to remember. Number 1, mesmerism is not hypnotism. They share surface features, but they are fundamentally different frameworks. One relies on invisible energy. The other relies on your own psychology. When someone conflates the two, they're repeating an historical error. Number 2, trance is not hypnosis. Trance is something your brain does naturally every day. Hypnosis is the deliberate, structured utilization of that capacity for a specific purpose. Entering a trance doesn't make you hypnotized. Directing that trance with intention does. And thirdly, the entire field was not built by discovering something magical. It was built by systematically stripping away superstition, layer by layer, century by century, until all that remained was a measurable, observable power of human imagination and focused attention. That's what hypnosis and hypnotherapy is. Not magic, not mysticism, not mind control. A natural capacity that's been refined over 5,000 years of human inquiry.